Hey folks, SSJPACMAN here, bringing you another YouTube video. Today we're going to be talking about the 2080 and 2080 Ti. It seems that NVIDIA has graced us with their new graphics cards. So let's dig right into it. This is from WCCF Tech right here. They're the only ones I saw talk about the DLSS, one of the new ray tracing features that doesn't seem to be implemented in any games. So there's this infiltrator demo here in 4K that shows it off, and well, if we get some games that run it, it seems like it's pretty cool. It really seems to help the 1% lows and the 10% lows. I mean, obviously the average frame rate is up quite a bit, but you can see here between the 2080 and 1080, not a whole lot of difference in standard rasterization or TAA. The DLSS is deep learning, super sampling. So basically, the games get submitted to NVIDIA, they run it through their supercomputer, and then they make an update for the graphics drivers. Then the game will be able to run the DLSS using the algorithm generated by the deep learning. That should help out the games. We're talking like 64 times super sampling and stuff like that. So that's pretty great. I'm glad to see that, but it just isn't in any games yet. So it's a little bit of a downside there, but you get to see a little comparison here. 10 frames extra would be 30%, a little less than 30% here. So we're looking at about 15% increase between the 2080 and the 1080 on this infiltrator demo for the average FPS. And then the 1% lows is a difference of, let's see here, 7 frames would be about almost 50%, a little less, like 40 to 50%. So that's pretty good. Pretty good little increase there on the 2080. Moving over to Jay's 2 cents. I used his for the synthetic benchmarks mostly that weren't related to DLSS or ray tracing. So you can see here the 3D Mark Firestrike benchmark. I believe this is DirectX 11 is Firestrike. You can see the 1080 Ti is actually beating the 2080. Normally between each generation, the 80 series card and the new 80 series card generally is pretty close to the last generation's Ti. So, and you can see that's pretty much the case here. It's a little bit worse in 3D Mark Firestrike Extreme at 4K, but then if we jump over to Time Spy, which is the DirectX 12 benchmark, you can see that 1080 Ti loses out to the 2080, but not by a whole lot. So I don't know. It's looking pretty neck and neck between the two. If you can find a 1080 for a 1080 Ti for a good price, I don't know. I think that would be more the direction I'd be going. But look in here, you can see that he's got the board partner cards that he's doing his benchmarks with. I didn't think that those were supposed to come out yet, but I've seen a couple people with board partner cards, so that's kind of interesting. Not that it's anything faster than the FE card, so not really a big deal there, at least in this particular test on the 2080 Ti. Well, you can see the 2080 Ti is approximately 30% faster in 3D Mark Firestrike Extreme than the 2080 and 1080 Ti. Little, little bit less than that, probably closer to 17%. So that's your synthetics. Moving back over to Time Spy, you can see that the 1080 Ti is about closer to that 20%. That's a lot closer to 20% there between the 1080 Ti and the 2080 Ti. And the 2080 Ti Ultra, the board partner card is actually the tiniest bit slower, margin of error stuff, but interesting to see. So it doesn't look like we're going to get that much more out of the board partner cards without NVIDIA putting out the blower style. So that's kind of interesting. Um, but on the 2080, you can see that they did get a little bit of gain over the Founders Edition. So I'm wondering if the 2080 is going to be a little bit better overclocker for people, maybe a little bit more worthwhile. But you're still talking about a solid 15 to 20% increase between the 2080 and the 2080 Ti. So let's move over to Gamers Nexus. So he had a pretty good illustration here. This is just in this F1 2018, but it illustrates the different resolutions and the scaling between the different cards. So the bright orange is the 2080 Ti. It obviously has the best frame rate for 1080, 1440, and 4K. You can see at 1440 they kind of shrink up a little bit, but not a whole lot. I think this is where a lot of people who are in the higher end budget bracket are gaming right now. Maybe with this generation of cards we'll see more people branch out in 4K, but pretty consistent scaling across the board here. But what I really find interesting is here's the 2080 in blue, and then the 1080 Ti in red, and they are just neck and neck. I mean, within margin of error, it almost looks like, especially as you get to 4K, they're pretty much identical. And then he has another chart that has the same thing on it, but it has Vega as well. And you can once again see that the 2080 and the 1080 Ti are just neck and neck here. These are the same benchmarks. 8086K, 5 gigahertz. Is this on max settings? 74. Okay, so it's pretty similar. A little different though. For some reason, he's got 69 for his 1080p on the 2080 there, but he's got 65 here. So whatever reason, I don't know why that's different at all. But anyhow, you can pretty much see that the 1080 or the 1080 Ti and the 2080 are pretty similar. The only difference being that the 2080 cost $800 currently. We'll see if the board partner cards are any cheaper. I don't think so. And the 1080 Ti you can currently get for about $650 brand new. So price wise, if it's a 5% difference for a 15% difference in price, that's not great. So yeah, if you're looking for an upgrade and you've got a 1080 Ti, the only way to go is a 2080 Ti, and they're $1,200. So wow, to get a 30% increase at the very most, you're looking at an extra almost 50% or 100%. Depends on how you look at it. 50%. The cost of a 2080 Ti would be what a 1080 Ti costs new now. So 30% increase for twice the price. That's not great. Moving over here to Linus Tech Tips, we will actually I'll play some of his video here. I've got it muted. Let me just go back. We'll talk about so you've got an 8700K here and a Ryzen 2700X. Linus is the only one that I saw actually benchmark on the Ryzen platform. He doesn't say what his timings are or anything like that on memory, so I have to assume that he's using the same kind of timings. Nothing special here. He does not say what he has it clocked to on the 8700K, so we're going to assume stock. But looking here, to begin with, we're looking at about 4 frames difference between the 2080 Ti on Ryzen and the 2080 Ti on an 8700K. The 2080 between the two is 1 frame difference. The 1080 Ti is 2 frames difference. The 1080 is only 1 frame difference, and Vega 64 for some reason is 2 frames difference. This is in Tomb Raider at 4K, but I just thought it was interesting to point out that Ryzen seems to be keeping up pretty good with the Intel processors here. The 1% lows are a little bit lacking here in DirectX 11, but when you see the next one, it will be in DirectX 12, and you can actually see tied for average 1 frame difference for the 1% lows, 1 frame difference on average for the 2080 compared between Ryzen and Intel. And on the 1% lows, we're looking at 3. The next ones are neck and neck, tied up. The next 1080 is 1 frame lower. 1% lows are a little bit worse. And oh no, they have the 1080 switched in position with Vega 64 here. So the 1080 gets 32 and 14 on Ryzen, and the Vega 64 gets 31 and 19 on Ryzen. So very, very close. I just wanted to point that out for everybody who thinks that you have to have an Intel uh, processor to run the fastest video cards. It just depends on what resolution you're playing at and what your target frame rate is. As far as it goes, neck and neck between Ryzen and Intel on these benchmarks at least. I don't know about everybody's, but here at 4K, it's pretty darn similar. And then when we move over to Far Cry, pretty similar results again, a little bit less than the 1% occasionally. But we should get to a benchmark coming up here where Ryzen is actually going to beat the Intel processors. So, oh, here we are in Counter-Strike 4K. In the 300 FPS, we're talking about 10 frames difference on a 2080 Ti between Ryzen and an 8700K. 10 frames difference would be 10% would be 30 frames, so that would be about a 3% difference between the Ryzen and the Intel. You can see here at the 2080 on the 1% lows, Ryzen beats the 2080 on the Intel for whatever reason, but then it shifts back on the 1080 Ti and then on all the other ones. But I thought that was kind of an interesting result there. And then in 3D Mark, AMD, the Ryzen 2700X beats Intel on all of these except for one. 34. The last two. For the 1% lows, it beats it. But I was just amazed to see how close AMD was keeping to Intel. You can see there on the superposition test, there are a lot of wins there for Ryzen again. And then moving on to DSX Mankind, we have pretty similar numbers. Better 1% lows with the 1080 Ti, better 1% lows with the 1080, better 1% lows with the Vega 64. Bottom line is, all I'm saying is that it's keeping up pretty darn good with the Intel processors these days. So I don't know if it's just driver support and things of that nature, but I was pretty pleased to see all that. So moving on to the final synopsis of this video, I think Paul says it best, and I'm actually going to play this little piece for you.
Is the 1080 Ti price as the baseline, then you're paying 14% more for a 2080 for 5% less performance, or
so 14% more for 5% less performance than a 1080 Ti. That just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I'm sure that with drivers updates and stuff like that, these two will pretty well match out with each other. And then it just all comes down to ray tracing and DLSS. Is it worth paying 14% more for the same raster performance to hopefully get some new technologies that do something? If you think so, then buy one. If you don't think so, then don't buy one. I think for me, I'm going to pick up a used 1080 Ti, and I'll show you why in just a minute.
Or you're paying 71% more for a 2080 Ti for 14% more performance. And
yeah, so
that, I think, really is the story of it when it comes down to these GPUs and what.
And so, like you just said, that's the story. 71% more for a 2080 Ti for 14% more performance over a 1080 Ti. That's not great. And then over here at Hardware Unboxed, we've got an excellent breakdown of price to performance based on current market prices. So you can buy a 1080 Ti right now for $680, and I've seen these as low as $650, which comes out to be a frame rate price to performance is $9.57 per frame versus the 2080 at $11.50 per frame, or approximately a 20% increase. 10% would be a dollar, roughly a dollar, so 20%, yeah. So looking at a 20% increase in price to get a brand new 1080 Ti versus a brand new 2080. And if you want to get a 2080 Ti, you're talking closer to about a 35, 37% increase for the 2080 Ti price per frame performance. That's a lot of money to spend. I've always built my computers based on price to performance, and that 2080 Ti is just, you better have that bad boy for 4 or 5 years for you to get your money out of it. I'm still rocking a 970. Um, and I'm thinking about upgrading to the 1080 Ti. Here we are at eBay, 499, 1080 Ti. I've bought several video cards off of eBay. I've never had any problems with them. A lot of times they just need to be dusted out. But you're looking at about 500 bucks, $460. I saw a couple of them go for $440 earlier today. This is USD, of course, but you know, you have to do your own conversions. But there's down here is a For the Win edition, $395. It's $40 shipping, so you're looking at $440 there. It's got 19 hours left on it. That would be the card I would have my eye on. I like EVGA. They didn't participate in GPP because they don't do any AMD stuff, so there's no competitive garbage going on there. I will not buy an MSI card again. I will not buy an ASRock card again. Anybody who participated in GPP, I don't know how long you're screwed with me, but I'm not buying your shit. Um, so, uh, yeah, it's just hard to argue with paying half the price of a 2080 to get a 1080 Ti that's at the most a year old. It's got more RAM on it. In certain situations, it performs faster than the 2080. It's half the price. It is a little less power efficient, but I don't think most gamers care about that stuff. That's only the miners that care about that. And I mean, I'd like to mine on it, but unless those 2080s and 2080 Ti's mine like the Dickens, I can't see anybody being that interested in them. And so here you can see what you can buy the cards for right now. You can buy a 2080 Ti for $1,200, but they're not available. You can buy a 2080 for $800. They are available. And this is going to be the real wild card, that 2070 there. If it's within 10% as fast as a 1080 Ti, that would make it on average about 15% slower than a 2080, and I don't think they would do that. But if that was the case, this would be a pretty good price for the card. I think that would be excellent, but I don't think it's going to be like that. I think it's going to be about 30% slower than a 1080 Ti. I think you'll get 1080 performance out of a 2070, but you'll get the some basic ray tracing and DLSS. So that's where I'm at on it. I don't know. I don't think they're worth it. Not for my money. I'm not spending $1,000 on a video card. I've always bought in the 70 series on average, um, and I think that's where the sweet spot generally lies for price to performance. We'll see this year. I'm not sure what it'll go for, but yeah, that price is a bit steep, a bit steep. So anyhow, if you like the video, like it. If you want to see more of me, then subscribe, and I'll have some more info as we get it. Thanks for watching.